Hello and welcome to yet a very interesting episode of Palestinapodden. Today we have a truly inspiring guest with us, Vijay Prashad. He's an Indian historian, author, political commentator and journalist. He has also become one of the most uncompromising voices in speaking out against global injustice today.
He has written over 40 books, including Washington Bullets, The Red Star Over the Third World, and Withdrawal, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, and the Fragility of U.S. Power. The last book he actually wrote with Noam Chomsky.
He is also an advisory board member of the U.S. Campaign for Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, which is part of the global BDS movement.
He is also the director of Tricontinental Institute for Research and chief correspondent for Globetrotter. And if that wasn't enough, he's also an editor of Leftward Books in New Delhi and Incani Books in Johannesburg and La Troja in Chile.
Have a great listen. And as always,
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Vijay, thank you so much for being a part of our podcast. We want to ask you first, what made you choose this career path as a journalist and a historian?
Well, I mean, it's actually quite interesting for me personally. May not be interesting for you, but when I was pretty young, I was about 15 years old, I was a regular reader of the newspaper insofar as I used to read the sports page, and my parents got the newspaper, so I would look at it in the morning. It would be there in the house and so on. But there was one particular day when I was very struck by looking at a photograph. This photograph has really been with me a lot, and coming to Norway actually is part of that photograph. So the photograph was of a line of dead bodies covered with cloth and two women who looked like they were from another century, leaning over the bodies, trying to identify them. And I remember reading the caption and none of it made sense to me. And I decided that I was going to investigate it. Now remember, this is 1982. And so there wasn't much of an easy path to investigate a photograph that had been taken, thousands of kilometers away from me. But I was interested, and so, I asked my parents and I tried my best to figure it out. And eventually, I read a few things and I wrote an article for my school newspaper on this particular incident. And the incident was the massacre in Beirut at Sabra and Shatila. And so this marked me greatly because I couldn't understand how this kind of thing could happen, where a refugee camp could be essentially sealed by an armed force, a UN member states armed force, in this case Israel. And it could allow its allies to enter in and perhaps itself participate in the massacre of, unarmed people, including some armed people, but lots of unarmed people, massacred, row after row of dead bodies. And years later, when I lived in Beirut, I was, as I often did, had a coffee with Robert Fisk in the morning in Hamra at Cafe Yunus. And Fisk is asking me this story. Like, Fisk would tell me amazing stories about his career as a journalist. And he asked me this story, which is about, what brought you into it. And I told him the story, and he said, well, let's go and try to find the place where these bodies were lying. And it was extraordinary. We went to the camp and we walked around, and obviously we were not going to find those women, and obviously didn't find the exact place. But as we walked around, he sort of recounted the story for me. And one of the reasons I came to Norway yesterday and today is because when Robert Fisk entered Sabra and Shatila, the camp, he was one of the first journalists to enter the camp while the gunfire was, still sort of happening. One of the people that went into the camp with him was Odd Karsten Twell of the Norwegian Broadcasting Association. Yeah. I'm going to meet him tonight. And I'm really looking forward to it because Carsten Twell was a crucial journalist to bring report of what was going on in this part of the world, not only to Norway, because he was, the main broadcaster, but in fact, he participated with a number of other journalists in Beirut and in other parts of the Arab world to basically mentor and train people to report these stories accurately. And somebody like me, the next, the generations that come after, we learned our reporting from these people. We learned to be honest about stories and to also study before writing. Like there's no gap between history writing and journalism. You can't write about the present unless you know the great process of our time. Like, what do you choose to write about? And in a way, the struggle of the Palestinians is part of the great process of our time. And it's not really, the Palestinians, the population is tiny in global terms, yeah? I've been to Gaza, to the West Bank, east to Jerusalem, to 48. It's tiny. Like the land is, what are we talking? It's like tiny. What are you guys fighting over? So it's extraordinary that this is a gripping, tragedy. And people say, why do the Israelis and the Americans want to obliterate the Palestinians in Gaza? Well, partly they just want to. And, I'm sure we're going to talk about that or maybe not, but they want to. Why? Because it's the great process of our time. They want to prevent these kind of victories of people's capacity to have sovereignty over their lives, They want us to be, in a way, 21st century slaves to their ideas. And that's the compelling reason for anybody to be a journalist, a reporter of a different kind, what they call nowadays content creators or whatever the hell you want to call it. Yeah? Doesn't matter what you want to call it. We're frustrated that, we don't want to be, in a way, the slave of somebody else's brain. We want to think for ourselves. Somebody says, oh, you're an anti-Semite. It's a stupid thing. No, I'm all for human freedom.
Exactly. Many people will say it's the center of all conflicts. You got the geopolitical, you got the religious, you got so many different agendas pushing towards the same goal to just like make it a part of the Western community, actually. With your background, with your perspective, how do you see all of the conflicts combined?
Let's take this one directly.
Yep.
Yeah. What are we talking about? It's 1948. The United Nations is 3 years old. The UN Convention Against Genocide is passed that year. The British decide that they're going to walk out of India in around 1946-47. The British decide they're going to end the mandate on Palestine. It's exactly the same moment. They're going to walk away. Well, in India and in Pakistan, initially the British don't talk about partitioning the country, but then they decide to partition it. In Palestine, same logic, let's partition it between the Jews and the Arabs. That was the basic thing. Before the partition plan could come into effect, the Israelis moved and they smashed 770,000 Palestinians out of their land and just seized the rest. Basically 80% of the land was meant to be partitioned, but they took all of it almost, yeah? The rest, Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan comes in and seizes it. Gaza is with Egypt and the UN. The Palestinians really got zero. In Gaza, the Palestinians set up a national government. It's made up of the old grandees, the old big families of Jerusalem and Nablus, and they give their names, but it's not really a national government. It's a nothing. It's a face-saving mechanism, yeah?
Yep.
This is in 1948, okay? You call it what you will, Nakba, whatever. In 1948, the South African government passes the apartheid law. These things are all happening at the same time. Apartheid starts in 1948. That's the first time South Africa formally has apartheid. Yeah, it's all happening at the same time. These vectors of human history are colliding. Yeah, this is the detritus of colonialism. The British have their hands all over this. You can go back to the Balfour Declaration, 1916. Balfour, what gives him the right to write on a piece of paper, I give this land to the Jews? He's not God. Yeah, he's Lord Balfour, not God. He's an irrelevant person. Yeah, what gives a British man a right to give away a part of the land? It's irrelevant. It's really 48. It's not Balfour. It's when the Israelis move and seize the land and throw everybody off. They seize it by force. This is exactly what the whites in South Africa do. In 1948, the same year, they say blacks are inferior. That's exactly what the Israelis say to the Palestinians. Palestinians are inferior. They are a vermin race. They have to get out of here. This is holy land. It's exactly what the Dutch Reformed Church is saying in South Africa, that the blacks are vermin. They're below us. Send them out. Let them come and work as our servants, but they're not equal. Israelis welcome Palestinians to come and do their work for them, but they didn't want them as equal citizens. So the great process of our time is an incomplete decolonization in southern Africa and in Palestine. Incomplete decolonization. This is different from the conflict here. There's a war in Sudan, there's a war here, there's a war in Ukraine. These are not all the same things. All wars are not the same. These conflicts. And then look at what happens, my friends. It's just a tragedy of history. 1994. South Africa moves from apartheid to formal democracy. Okay, 30 years ago, they end apartheid, formal democracy. It wasn't perfect, but it was a break. Unfortunately, the PLO surrenders in 1994. And in Palestine, instead of walking the road of Nelson Mandela, effectively Yasser Arafat allows himself to be handcuffed to an office in Ramallah under the overall direction of the unbroken Israeli hegemony. So in 94, just when South Africa wins something, not everything, something, Palestine loses almost everything. Even 22% of the land that comes, it's not even 22%, area A, area B, area C. If you take what is actually Palestinian sovereignty, it's like 4%. 4% of historical mandate Palestine. Yeah. The struggle in Palestine in many ways, and I don't like to use this term a lot, but it's pretty singular, because it's different from what happened even in South Africa, where in 94, there was a surrender. And that surrender has never been undone. The surrender continues. And the Israelis knew that was a surrender. They signed it, knowing it's a surrender. They accepted Area A, B, C, and they immediately started to violate A, B, C. They annexed East Jerusalem in violation of Oslo. They annexed large parts of the West Bank through settlements, violation of Oslo. They annexed large parts of Gaza with settlements, violation of Oslo. The so-called safe passage from Gaza to East Jerusalem to West Bank, which was supposed to connect these, a corridor for people to move back and forth, immediately violated. They built the apartheid wall around the West Bank, violated Oslo. These are all violations of Oslo. And now they just want to take Gaza. They've actually, since 2006 roughly, they've been bombing Gaza almost annually to get the Palestinians out of there, to send them to Egypt or to Jahannam or wherever, but definitely not let them remain there. And so then your 4% of the 22% becomes 2%. And then since they've already annexed East Jerusalem and they've annexed most of the West Bank, now they're going to say, well, everybody just go to Jordan, or if you can stay in Nablus and in Jenin, but you're going to be a permanent second-class citizen. The Americans will say, okay. So when you ask, it's an intersection of a lot of struggles. That may be true, but in fact, it's not. In fact, there's nothing religious about this struggle. Even though Hamas is one of the leading forces in Gaza, this is nothing religious about. I argue with my friends all the time. This is not about Islam. This is not about the Turks and the Indonesians saying our Muslim brothers. This is a struggle of decolonization. all people who want to end colonialism are for this struggle. This is not a Muslim struggle. This is a struggle against colonialism and imperialism. Now, if Muslims are against imperialism and colonialism, then it's a Muslim struggle.
Exactly.
But it's not a Muslim struggle for which I am in solidarity. No, I am there because it's anti-colonial.
Yeah.
And I abhor colonialism.
So you were saying, because we also see a pattern of what you've been saying now as well, you know, since the Oslo Accords, you give Israel certain rules that they need to uphold, and then they know they can break them. So you've seen now they broke the ceasefire most of 18th of March. They're not letting any medical aid, food, nothing into Gaza. Publicly announcing that they're going to annex the West Bank in 2025. Are you surprised at all about this, what they're doing in Gaza and the West Bank now, seeing their history, how they've moved?
I mean, surprised would be an act of naivete. Yeah, I mean, there's two things, you know. One is I'm shocked. I'm shocked as a human being. I'm shocked that fellow humans could behave like this against humans. And I would recommend very strongly that the capacity to be shocked should never be dulled. You know, you should never lose the capacity to be angry at something, to be shocked at something, because then you dull yourselves. You know, there are young people dying. There are people I know who've been killed in this. People like, when I was in Gaza, that took me around and so on. People I know, you know, don't know them very well, but people I know. I published a book by Hyperimperialism. He wrote the front piece for the book by WhatsApp to me, WhatsApp notes, from Khan Yunis, then Rafah. Now he lives in South Africa. It's a great book, Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind. Hyperimperialism is an amazing guy, professor of literature at University, Gaza University. There are real people there. Palestinians are real people with all their foibles, you know, with all their problems. Like, there's nothing great about Palestinians. There are annoying Palestinians, lovable Palestinians, yeah?
Yeah.
Like all people.
We're the annoying Palestinians.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said annoying Palestinians, you know, you can't romanticize a people.
Yeah.
If you romanticize a people, you stop seeing them as human. These are real human beings, man. You should be shocked at what Israel is doing. But I'm not surprised. And I think that distinction is important for me to make, because I'm not surprised, because this is how Israel behaves punctually. On a punctual basis, Israel behaves in a dehumanized fashion to dehumanize Palestinians. You see, if you deny people electricity, water, and so on, you put them in a situation where when a truck of food comes in, they mob the truck. And then the Israelis take pictures and say, look at these savages. Yeah? Because you have starved people. And then they are going to rush at a truck. And then you say, look, they don't even know how to line up and so on. This has already happened twice during this genocide. That they have tried to use, they've said, you know, the people fired at a truck. It turned out to be false information. But yes, people did rush at trucks. They grabbed things from them because their families are starving. And people behave like that when they are desperate. Yeah? Look at how they treated Khaled al-Jarrar. Okay, a member of the Palestinian National Council, Legislative Council, elected official, etc. They arrested her during this genocide in the West Bank, in her home, put her in a prison where there was barely any air, almost no oxygen in her cell. She wrote a letter out of jail. Through her lawyer, it was taken out, where she said, I had to lie on the floor of my cell, put my face near a crack in the door to breathe. Yeah? This is how they treated an elected official of the Palestinian leadership. Yeah? This is how they treat people. So I'm not surprised, you know, but I'm shocked. And I really think you cannot be dulled into thinking these things are normal. This is not a normal way for a government to behave.
Yeah.
The way Israel has bombed Gaza is not normal. There is nothing normal about it. but I'm not surprised by how they bombed. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I think that distinction for me is like between life and death.
Why do you think Israel is so special to the West?
It's a very good question, my friend. And I've had this thought over and over in my head. And I would like to begin by saying it is really peculiar that Israel is in Eurovision, Israel plays in the European Football League. I mean, this is just a weird thing. You know, people treat Israel like a European country in Asia. You know, it's not a European country. Like, if Israel can be in Eurovision, why wasn't I allowed to sing in Eurovision? I would have been singing the year ABBA won. I would have done great. Yeah? I would have been amazing. They didn't allow because they said only Europeans. But what? Israel is not in Europe. You know that, right?
Aren't they also very persistent that they're the only democracy in the Middle East, and then they keep continuing
And they're
to...
indigenous as well.
Yeah, indigenous, but they
Right.
they keep going to European things, as you say. But they're very like, no, we're the only democracy in the Middle East.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unlike, of course, Turkey,
Yeah,
which is also in the Middle East
yeah,
and is a NATO member.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that Turks don't react poorly to that characterization. Yeah, they should. I mean, formally the Turks have elections, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how can they say they're the only democracy in the Middle East? Because, I mean, there are so many US allies with elections, like Egypt, for instance, where, you know, they have excellent elections. The leader always wins with 99% of the vote. It's an excellent election. All is good in the world. Yeah. That's also in the Middle East, I'm told. I mean, you know, we're not going to be silly and say Saudi Arabia has elections, but, you know, there are other countries with elections.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the Middle East. Yeah. I mean, for instance, Iran has elections, and actually is a democracy too. Actually, in fact, it is. Now, it is interesting because when Palestinians tried to exercise their mandate in 2005, they had democratic elections. And in Gaza, they decided to elect Hamas because they were given a choice and they picked Hamas. And the United States decided Hamas cannot govern Gaza. So the United States told the Fatah group there, well, you are allowed to take up arms against Hamas. So Hamas, which won the election, has never really been able to manage a democratic government because they were not to the taste of either Israel. So when they talk about democracy, it's a joke. I mean, look, frankly, I'm not very much a Muslim Brotherhood type guy. Okay, so that's not my scene. Yeah, as the youth say, it's not my vibe. The Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah, Hamas, not really my vibe. Ikhwan in Egypt, not my vibe. But listen, if people are electing these organizations, they are electing them. If you're going to tell me that democracy is the way and people are electing them, well, let them rule. Let them see how they do. If they fail, they fail. Okay, I may not like them. Yeah, but that's irrelevant. It's not a matter of taste. I'm not going shopping for cereals, you know, choosing different cereal boxes. This is them deciding on who and they believe that this organization is on the ground with them. You want to win, go out and campaign against them. Yeah, you can't win an election, you can't win an election. I'm sorry. In this country, you have elections, and there's a lot of money and media power that backs the majority parties. Small parties don't have a chance. I mean, what democracy are we talking about? In the United States, money democracy. Yeah, a lot of money, media behind people, they slander small left parties, they don't allow them to survive. It's hardly a great democracy. Yeah. So in that sense, even these terms, democracy, they're not so well baked, you know, that they are not raw inside. So the concept is raw. And in fact, when people say things like Israel is only democracy, Israel is also a country that prevented the Palestinians from having a democracy. You know, where are the Palestinians allowed to have their mandate? Like, why can't they continue their own elections? Yeah. You know? See, then they say, but that's a terrorist organization. But so is Mr. Netanyahu.
Yep.
He's a terrorist who's leading a terrorist government. They are inflicting terror on the Palestinian, Lebanese and Syrian people. Yeah, that's a terrorist government, man. Can't have a greater terror than a genocide.
Exactly. I have to bring you back though.
Yeah.
Why is Israel so important?
Yes, we're coming to that.
Yeah.
Remember the thing about the European, so on?
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is that there is an idea. There is a very strong idea that it is a European outpost. It's a very strong idea. And there is a set of affinities that have grown, and it's different for Europe and the United States. But for the United States, there's a set of affinities that have grown with Israel over a long period of time. Some of these affinities are bizarre and weird, like the right-wing Christian affinity. You know, the right-wing Christians are the actual authentic anti-Semites because they believe that the Jews must build the second temple in Jerusalem. And when the Jews do that, God will kill all non-Christians and Christians will rise up to heaven in the rapture. Among those killed will be all Jews. So that means the fundamentalist Christians who are Christian Zionists are actually anti-Semites. I am not an anti-Semite. I have no problem with people who are Jewish at all. Yeah? These guys want to kill all Jews and they are called Christian Zionists. So that's one crazy seam of thought. There are other seams of thought. I mean, there's a large Jewish population in the United States that has a social and cultural impact on neighbors, friends, whatever. There is the impact of the Holocaust in the United States, which has a different role than Europe. I'll come to Europe in a second. In the United States, Peter Novick and others have shown this, that before 1967, in fact, US policy was not pro-Israeli. It was after the 67 war that the US really shifts. I mean, the US elite was super, and in fact, I would argue still super anti-Semitic. I mean, you listen to Richard Nixon's tapes. I mean, the way he's talking about Jews. He's talking to Henry Kissinger, who's Jewish, in the most anti-Semitic language. That's Richard Nixon, who was the president after the 67 war, in the 70s. But slowly, US policy begins to shift. And this is also a cultural shift in the country. You know, before 67, American Jews were split on Israel. There was a section that was not keen on Israel. They didn't want to go to Israel. They didn't want to do Aliyah. They didn't want to live in Israel and so on. That begins to shift after 67. The new 67 generation, let's call it that, changes the opinion. And a new lot of leftist intellectuals, Jewish intellectuals, who were effectively, Marxists and democratic socialists and so on, moved to the right on Israel. These are the so-called neoconservatives. This is the formation of neoconservative thinking. Yeah, these are a group of intellectuals, many of them started out as Trotskyites. They move through Zionism to the right. And they become the intellectual godfathers of the Ronald Reagan movement. This is a very big role they play. Irving Kristol is one of the lead people, Commentary Magazine and so on. These are lead intellectuals. Irving Kristol's son, Bill Kristol, plays a similar role for George W. Bush. So these people play a role. They shape intellectual discourse on Israel. New books come out after the 70s. You get a whole television culture, Masada, the Jews on a mountain, Exodus, this whole dramatization, the Entebbe, what happens at Entebbe in 79. It's a great story. I don't know if you guys know the story at Entebbe. Well, there's a hijacking of Israeli aircraft, which are then landed in Entebbe airport in Uganda. Idi Amin allows them to land and they are positioned on the ground in the airport. And the Israelis do something pretty daring. They come in super secret and they land planes on that runway. They have extra pilots. They rush the planes, get the hijackers and fly their planes out. And one of the people who dies in that is Benjamin Netanyahu's brother. He dies in Entebbe. And the movies and books and 90 Minutes at Entebbe, it's a big thing. Mossad becomes glamorized. Like Mossad is this amazing intelligence agency. Books are written, not just non-fiction, but fictionalized Mossad agents. And a whole industry comes to create a picture. And the culture in the United States becomes decidedly pro-Israeli. In a next period, you'll get this whole pro-Israeli thing because Israel is a startup nation. Tech, the tech boom in Israel and so on. Very good PR work. Okay, that's in the United States. It's a transformatory situation after 1967. In Europe, it's different. Europe has never sufficiently hung its head in shame for hundreds of years of institutionalized anti-Semitism. Germany in particular, and Poland and other countries, they should spend 50 years not saying a damn thing about anti-Semitism, not accusing anybody, because they should hang their heads in shame for institutionalized, the Holocaust did not happen in the Arab world. It happened in Eastern Europe. It happened in Germany, it happened in Poland, it happened there. Yeah, that's where the camps were. There was no camp in Palestine. Yeah, Palestinians, Jews, Christians, Armenians, they all lived together. Okay, you can find events here and there of disagreements, fighting, whatever, somebody stabbed somebody. Everywhere in the world there is a history of some conflict that gets, religiousized. Always, you angry with somebody, you decide to make it a religious conflict. That happens. But it was not institutionalized anti-Semitism. Just didn't have it in our world. Yeah, I grew up in Calcutta. Calcutta, there was a Baghdadi Jewish community. So interesting. The Baghdadi Jewish community of the Sassoon family, they had relatives in Beirut. In the 1920s, Calcutta Baghdadi Jews raised money to build a synagogue in Beirut in 1925. Yeah, when I was living in Beirut in the 2000s, I visited the old synagogue, which is in the center of the town, Solidarity. It was destroyed, but it was destroyed during the Civil War because it was on the Green Line between West and East Beirut.
Yeah.
And so it is being rebuilt. And guess who is helping finance the rebuilding of the synagogue in Beirut? You will never guess. Who is helping fund the rebuilding of the synagogue in the center of Beirut in Solidarity?
I'm going to say like Germany or some European countries.
No, that's the wrong answer.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. You want to take a lifeline or you want to give me an answer? You want to make a phone call? You want to make a phone call?
Yes.
Well, call Beirut and talk to Hezbollah.
Wow.
Because Hezbollah is helping rebuild the synagogue in Beirut.
Okay.
That's the world we come from. It's a very complicated world. It's not, it's not the world of institutionalized anti-Semitism, at least. It has its own problems. From our world came Attila the Hun and the sacking of Baghdad in whenever the hell it was sacked, 12 something. Yeah, the burning of the libraries. We have our barbarisms. We are not immune from barbarism, okay? Our world has got all kinds of crazies, yeah? I mean, what was Saladin doing? Who was he fighting? I mean, whatever. We have our own issues, yeah? Okay. They have institutionalized anti-Semitism. Then there's the Holocaust in Germany, Poland, and so on, yeah? After the war, Germany decides, firstly, the West Germany decides to rehabilitate the Nazis. And the Nazis enter like the intelligence services, the judiciary. In East Germany, they executed a lot of Nazis, which, I'm in favor of. They executed the mayor of Weimar, who, brutally sent people to death camp of Buchenwald and so on. These people, the death penalty was there. What is it to be used against, if not against genocidal maniacs? Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. People may be against death penalty. Maybe it's banned in Norway, most likely banned in Norway. But I mean, for God's sake, if you're going to use it, it should be against genocidal mass murderers, yeah? So the communists did use it in the East, but the West Germans rehabilitated the Nazis. Talk about rehabilitation. The Nazis became heads of, the judges and so on, university professors and rectors. And at some point, Germany started to pay reparations to the State of Israel, yeah? And this provokes, I think, inside Europe, lack of an actual reckoning with its history of institutional anti-Semitism is displaced onto complete and uncritical support for Israel. The way to pretend that you got past your institutional anti-Semitism is unwavering support for Israel. But unwavering support for Israel without a reckoning of institutional anti-Semitism is insufficient for me.
Okay.
If you don't look into your own soul, what's the point of paying money to get your soul cleaned? You haven't even gone there. You haven't even looked at it. So when you ask, I'm just saying that at least these two parts of the world have kind of different reasons. The United States is way more sociological. The explanation is way more sociological. You got to look at the different social groups and the factors and the media and this, that, and the other. Europe is way more psychosocial.
Yeah.
It just hasn't tended to its ugly history. And again, it's not the Holocaust. It's like centuries of institutional anti-Semitism. Jews living in ghettos, not in Germany alone, but in Italy. The ghetto here, the ghetto there. This was a common thing. Yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah.
Institutionalized anti-Semitism. I get it. Nowadays, all cities, the poor live in a place, the this live in a that. There are all kinds of segregations. But we don't actually institutionalize it. It's only institutionalized through capitalism, that you can't afford to take an apartment. But technically, you should be allowed to live anywhere.
Yeah.
Jews, even if they had the money, couldn't leave the ghetto. That's institutionalized anti-Semitism.
Yeah. You've also often spoken about imperialism and colonialism. We were speaking about colonialism earlier as a persistent structure, just like you're saying now about anti-Semitism, rather than a historical phase. Can you elaborate a bit on that as well?
Yeah, it's a little bit sort of high-level thinking if you get into it. So I don't want to go from that angle. Look at the history of the concept of imperialism and so on. I don't want to go into it from that angle. I want to come at it from a much more common sense way, okay? Because, why does the United States and its Western allies, plus Japan and South Korea, if you add up all their military budgets, why do they account for 80% of world military spending? Yeah, if you just count these countries, NATO countries, a few Eastern Asian countries, it's 80%, okay? Russia accounts for 10% of world military spending. This is 2023 numbers. And China accounts for 4%. 4% of world military spending. Yeah. The West and its NATO buddies, 80%. Why? Why does the United States need 4 military bases now in Norway? Why does it need 40 military bases in the Nordic countries? Why? How many military bases does Norway have in the US?
None? Do
None?
we have any?
None.
None. Yeah.
Why would you have a base in the US?
Yeah.
You would have no military bases. But it's sort of normal to expect the US to have a military bases in other countries.
Yeah.
It's like if I say United States has 40 military bases in Scandinavia, you're like, okay, thanks. I didn't know the number, but that's interesting. Thanks a lot. But if I said the Scandinavian countries have 3 military bases in the US, you're like, why would they do that? It's strange, it's kind of normal, The US has all these military bases in the Gulf Arab countries. Well, that's to be expected. Abu Dhabi has decided to build a base in the island of Jamaica. Why would Abu Dhabi have you get my point. It's completely normal that the United States and its allies spends 80% of the world military budget. It's completely normal that the US has 990 bases around the world. 990 bases around the world. Yeah? It's completely normal. You go to, Niger in the Sahel region, world's largest drone base. Whose? USA. Yeah, why? What are they defending against? They say, we're defending against terrorism. Hey, but listen, I met the Al-Qaeda guys there. They basically smuggle cigarettes. That's their main vibe. They are cigarette smugglers. That's their main That's how they make the money. They're not really, most of the Al-Qaeda fellows there are some bad Al-Qaeda fellows in Algeria that are creating chaos in northern Mali. I don't want to make this seem like a joke, but it's also true that most of them are just the old smugglers, that have carried the flag of Al-Qaeda for convenience sake sometimes, and sometimes to scare the hell out of their rivals. They're like, we are Al-Qaeda. Yeah, but you're watching Hindi movies at night. 2 Al-Qaeda camps I've stayed at in my life. Both of them at night, the fighters put on Hindi movies, Indian Bollywood movies on their laptops.
Really?
It's really weird, I was in an Al-Qaeda camp in Syria, in the Kalamun Mountains, and there was Algerian boys. They all were extremely beautiful looking, like they looked like Jesus, with Kalashnikovs and so on. And at night, they sort of open their laptops, and they've got like 50 Hindi movies, Bollywood movies saved there. And they just sit and they watch the Hindi movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guys, you're meant to be creating a Sharia law. Like you're killing people for Sharia, and you're watching these women in like saris run around and kiss these boys. And what's going on, brother? You're meant to be like the upholder of Salah, And I don't know where's the sheikh? When you need the sheikh to wag his finger. Well, interestingly, the sheikh in this particular camp, the sheikh was the leader of the fighting unit. My second day there, he called me and he started asking me questions. And they were so curious, like, what's an Indian journalist doing in Syria? And like, what's your background? And I would barely tell them anything. And they were like, no, what's your background? We want to know everything. Are you a Muslim or a Hindu, or what's your background? And I told them I used to recite this poem, from Kabir. Kabir Das is a great poet who says, there's no mosque, there's no temple, there's only you, O God, there's no priest, there's no mullah, there's only you, O God. And they'd be like, this is not good, this is haram, it's really not good. I mean, how can you say there's no mosque and there's no, this is not good. And I was like, but this guy called me in and he's sitting with me and he says to me, who's your favorite Bollywood actor? And I was not prepared to make an answer. So I just saw it. And then he said, come on, tell me. And he was goading me. And I said, no. Then he said, you're afraid to tell me because you get the answer wrong, different from me, I'll kill you. Yeah. And I said, well, maybe I'm Sheikh, I'm afraid to say anything to you. So then he told me his favorite.
Okay.
And interesting, when I published the article, my editor and I decided, I told the editor, I don't want to publish the name of the actor. He said, no, we just can't because that person's house will be destroyed. I mean, they'll say Al-Qaeda's favorite actor, is ... So we can't publish it. But it was super funny, who these guys are.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, the point I'm the roundabout point, because, we're talking, you ask about imperialism, the roundabout point is, I mean, these people build military force, 990 bases, all this stuff, for a reason. They're not wasting their money. They want to intimidate us to do their bidding.
Yep.
They don't want us to be, to be independent people. That's imperialism. You don't need a political science definition. You just need to ask a question, why do they need so much military force? Because when there's a popular movement in Burkina Faso, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and they want to build their own, solar power, and they want to build their own car, it's illegal. You got to buy stuff from us. You're not allowed to be sovereign. We're going to take away your sovereignty. And, this is a debate that people can have. Like I know during the whole thing in Syria, lots of people fought about that, saying, Assad is a this, or Assad is a that, and this position and that position. And in a way, okay, I found that debate tiring. Because whatever you think of Assad or Saddam or whatever it is, let me tell you something. Good or bad, the person that the imperialist is going to put in their place is going to be worse. Is going to be worse. I know lots of diaspora Syrians are now saying, well, democracy. This guy who's there now, one of the first things he said is, we're going to normalize with Israel. I think Bashar al-Assad has betrayed his people. I mean, the one thing Arab leaders were good at was on the day of being overthrown, they gave a speech saying, I will be there till the end. Oh, I am leaving now, but we will be back. Yeah. Gaddafi was killed, brutalized. Yeah. Saddam was killed. He hid, but he said, we were fighting. Yeah. Brutalized people. And Saddam, till the moment his neck was broken in the gibbet, he was like, you are an illegal. Remember that? I don't know if you watched the video. In the trial, he was yelling at the judge, you're so scared of me.
I saw that yesterday.
You don't have, you wearing a mask in front of me, you dogs, and you are sons of dogs and whatnot. Where was Bashar al-Assad? He ran away, left to Jolani. Whatever you think, who these guys put in is worse. Why? Because these guys will put in people who will say let's surrender our sovereignty.
We've talked about it actually a lot of times. Like, it's sickening that the Western imperialists can drag a person through the streets and throw things at him or hang him in the town square. If we switched it and that happened to a Western leader, it would be like total chaos. It would be doomsday, probably.
That's called the international division of humanity.
Yeah, it is.
You just can't do it to a white person.
No, never.
I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, but you just can't do that. It's not legal. It's fine. These guys, they are basically, they are damaged already. Yeah, they're damaged already. You can do anything to them.
Yeah.
You just can't do it to this. The other day I was talking to a friend of mine in Ramallah, and I was saying, he said something amazing. He said, I said, brother, right through this conflict, no Palestinian has emerged as the voice of Palestine. Yeah.
Like a Yasser Arafat.
And he said, we have been orphaned. And I said, who was your father or mother? He said, Arafat. He said, I am of the political tendency that rejected Oslo, that is hugely critical of Arafat. But let's face facts, guys. This man stood there and said, we are Palestinians. You want to kill me, I'm right here. And they killed him. I don't care what any report says. They killed that guy. He was sitting in his house in Ramallah. They were bombing him. I mean, they went after that guy till the end. Yeah. And again, whatever you think of him politically, at least there was a symbol of the Palestinian nation. They have not allowed a symbol to be birthed again. And that is a telling thing. And I would say that this is also to the discredit of Hamas. Hamas has not built a credible figure, a political figure. Like even Khalid Mishal, who was sitting outside and so on, they didn't build them up as a Palestinian figure. They were always leaders of Hamas. And this is the limitation of Hamas. Hamas never really saw itself as the leader of the Palestinian people. It always saw itself as Hamas. And these were Hamas leaders. And you need a leader of the Palestinian people. I know that, we all believe in like horizontal whatever and democracy and nobody's special. Yeah, Rania, you're not special. You're just another person and, you're just a... It's not true. That's not how history works. Humans don't function like that. All movements birth leaders.
Yeah.
For sure.
And the widest national liberation struggle has to have a leader for them all, for all, not for a political party.
Yeah.
Arafat was clever. He was a Fatah leader. He was the PLO chairperson. But he was always the leader of the Palestinian people. He's very clever how he did that.
He was an icon.
He was the icon.
Yeah.
He dressed snazzy. He put on shades.
Wayfarers,
He
Ray-Bans.
stood for the Palestinians, man.
Yeah.
People were impressed. He's got the kafia falling off his head, yeah. Always on the move, yeah. That's the construction of a national symbol. Today, it's not. And that's an issue. 14 factions. The Israelis will not allow the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they will not allow even one of their leaders to stand above and breathe the air. No DFLP, Democratic Front leader, will be allowed because they are largely either in exile or in the West Bank.
Yeah.
They will not allow them. Yeah, Khalida Jarrar already talked about how they treated her. Yeah, won't allow it. Fatah is not going to be able to produce a leader of the quality. Maybe Barghouti, could emerge as that figure. Yeah,
Marwan Barghouti.
Marwan Barghouti, coming out of prison, the lion of Palestine, maybe. But they're just not going to let him do that.
Yeah.
They're just not going to allow him. And Hamas doesn't have the capacious politics. That's the limitation of the Brotherhood. They don't have the politics to represent all Palestine, unfortunately. Like, they have produced extremely brave. I mean, the way Shinwar died was the way he lived. He threw a stick at the drone, Brave people. But Yahya Sinwar was not leading the Palestinian people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
He was not there. And so that's a big, and imperialism, when you ask, what is imperialism? Imperialism is a structured policy to prevent subjugated people from standing up on their feet. And one way to do that, to prevent that, people, is to kill their leaders. They assassinate Lumumba. They assassinate Che Guevara. They assassinate. They do coups, overthrow people. Salvador Allende, gone, gone.
Yeah.
Why do they assassinate people? We keep believing in everybody's a leader. It's not true. When they killed Lumumba, it demoralized everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they killed Chris Hani, it demoralized the working class in South Africa. After the Tunisian revolt against Ben Ali, when Zaid Abidine Ben Ali flees the country, one of the popular figures was a great poet, emerged out of the trade union movement. They killed him. Yeah, they killed him. I mean, I can give you chapter verse. Yeah, who was the brightest Palestinian intellectual leader? Ghassan Kanafani, blown up in a bomb.
Yeah.
Imagine if Kanafani was killed in his 30s.
Yeah.
Imagine if he had been alive now. He would have been alive. He'd be old but alive. What a voice, man. The voice of clarity, political clarity. Yeah. They systematically don't allow leadership to emerge. Arafat was a survivor. He was like Castro, man. They tried to kill this guy. They were looking for him. I have a hilarious story, not hilarious, but when Arafat had to flee Beirut in 82, Israelis invaded Beirut to get rid of the PLO from Beirut. They wanted the PLO out. Arafat fled Beirut in a car with the parents of a friend of mine, and they went to Tripoli, northern Lebanon. And they were hiding in a safe apartment in Tripoli. So the PLO had already made a deal with the Israelis that, look, we're going to go to Tunisia. And, and there was a departure, and the PLO fighters were allowed safe passage to get on the boat and go. So BBC Radio announces that Yasser Arafat has arrived in Tunisia and this and that and the other. And my friend, who was, a kid in 82, teenager, whatever, sitting there with Arafat in the living room in the safe house thinking, how can he be in Tunisia? He's sitting right here. He was a survivor.
Yeah.
He knew how to survive. I mean, he knew how to, he was not going to show up at the docks to go on a ship with the Israelis watching and somebody snipe him out. Yeah. He wasn't going, he's smart. Yeah. Survivor. But most of them didn't survive. Kanafani was killed with his niece, going to register her for classes at the American University of Beirut. Lamis is the name of his niece. That car bomb got the two of them. She was coming out of her teens. The Israelis didn't care. Civilian girl, young, boom.
And they still don't. Exactly. We've touched imperialism a lot of times. I want to dig deeper into hyperimperialism as well. Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, in which you also were a main author, published a study called Hyperimperialism,
Yeah.
a dangerous decadent new stage, which discusses America's attempt in keeping global domination through military power, economic sanctions, and cultural control. We also talked about the military basis. You call it the new type of imperialism. You describe the current phase as hyperimperialism. Can you define hyperimperialism, and how does this differ from earlier stages of imperialism?
I mean, it's actually a pretty straightforward thing. It's not like a totally complicated thing. One of the problems with the concept imperialism in the left is that some of our problems come from a slight misreading of Lenin. Because in 1916, when Lenin completed his text called Imperialism, he was not writing a theory of imperialism. Lenin didn't go into that study trying to understand what is imperialism. He was interested in answering the question, how did the European countries go to war against each other? He wanted to explain the so-called Great War, World War I. That's what he was interested in doing. And what he discovered was that capitalist firms operating in a country, eventually as they grow and become monopolies in the country, want to extend their market out of the country.
Yep.
And so other capitalist firms in other countries clash with these firms. So inter-capitalist conflict converts into inter-imperialist war.
Yep.
So that they use their states to fight other states to reduce the power of other capitals. That's what Lenin basically comes of. The imperialism emerges as extra economic attempts at monopoly firms getting advantages of resources, markets, etc., etc., etc. Right after he finishes that text, the Soviet Union is born out of the October Revolution. Everything changes. All the capitalist countries that had been fighting with each other invade the Soviet Union together. Because the new dialectic is not capitalist country versus capitalist country with firms trying to compete with each other. That continues, inter-capitalist conflict. But the primary problem for them now is how to get rid of the workers' state. So from 1917 to roughly 1991, the whole life of the Soviet Union, the capitalist states, the big ones, United States, Germany, Japan later, Japan and Germany emerging later, but all the G7 countries and so on, they cooperate with each other against the Soviet Union. They create NATO, a military alliance, in 1949. In 1974, they create the Group of 7 countries to cooperate during an economic crisis, to go after the oil countries, oil-producing countries, but all to maintain their unity against the Soviet Union. So imperialism then is not inter-imperialist rivalry, but it becomes a singular bloc against the socialist bloc. It's basically as simple as that. When the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, the United States believes that it was the victor, the first among equals, and then its subordinate Europeans, subordinate Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, and so on, come underneath the United States, and they think they will rule the world for the next 10 centuries. Yeah, this is the end of everything. Yeah, Darth Vader has won, and there is no alliance anymore, and Luke Skywalker is dead, and that's it. It's 10 centuries of rule of, the evil empire.
Yeah.
That's it, pals. Now what happens is they get arrogant. And they export, I'm going to talk about this a lot tonight as well, they export all their manufacturing and say, oh, let's just use cheaper labor somewhere else. Okay, great. So they're manufacturing in China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia. This geography will become familiar. Bangladesh, Mexico, Brazil, Southern Africa. Let's export all these places. Let's just import goods and services. We have a financial sector. We're absolutely chill. 10 centuries of rule. You ever watch the movie WALL-E? With a little
robot, yeah.
On the spaceship, people just sit there on lilos, sucking drinks and watching TV,
Yeah.
That's what it is, a chill life. We'll just go through the galaxy drinking a whatever smoothie and watching TV and doing yoga every once in a while, and we're chilled. We'll just and underneath on the planet of work will be all these Chinese and Indians and Bangladeshis and whatever, and let the Israelis kill all the Palestinians, and they'll create new technologies for us to watch movies and whatever. Okay. Problem. This creates a serious problem because in these Western societies, the very rich say, great, we support all this, but we're not going to pay taxes anymore. We just refuse. We're going to take our money and go elsewhere. So what you see simultaneously a growing economic buoyancy in that geography, India, China, Vietnam, and so on. They're suddenly producing things, they're creating science, they're creating technology. They have a train that goes at 400 kilometers an hour. Wow. What? How can the Chinese create a train like that? They're just meant to be the drone bees. We are the queen bees. But the queen bee is no longer spending money to even tend the hive. The hive is a mess. There are things falling apart. The airports are not working. Trains, German trains gone to seed. The rich are not paying taxes. There's no money. Nobody wants to invest anything. There's no factories. Universities are deteriorating. People are not studying science. The whole thing is collapsing. Kids are on TikTok all day, not studying mathematics. The civilization collapsing. What does the West have as its comparative advantage to prevent the rise of Asia? Armed force. So then the West, in a hyper-imperialist moment, tries to convert its military advantage into a political advantage and threatens China that unless you, as the leading goose in this mad goose chase, unless you stop developing, we are going to bomb you. And we're going to prevent you from advancing. And the Chinese turn around and say, you did this to us in the 1840s. It was called the Opium Wars. We've built up a defense. We are not going to surrender to you. And that's exactly the showdown.
Yeah.
And we call that showdown hyper-imperialism. There is no multiple imperialisms. The Russians are not imperialists. They're a defensive power. They can't take on the United States. It's a defensive power. China is not trying to conquer the world. China is defending itself.
Yeah.
And man, there are some pretty crazy people these days. The Yemenis are defending themselves. They're defending the Palestinians. The Iranians say, we are going to defend ourselves. And the West is saying, no, we're going to overthrow you. And so then who's the crazy person, man? When Noam Chomsky says the United States is the greatest terrorist power on the earth, I asked him millions of times. I was like, Noam, do you think that stuns people? Is that like shock therapy? He says, no, that's an accurate statement.
Yeah.
That's actually a scientific statement. Because Iran has not overthrown Iraq. They went to war, which was bloody, and they didn't provoke the war. Iraq attacked Iran. They didn't provoke the war. It was an Iraqi attack backed by the Saudis and the United States. The United States has overthrown everybody. And is now doing a genocide. And I don't agree with people to say that the United States backs Israel's genocide. The US and Israel are doing this genocide together.
Yeah.
This is not a backing. They are 100% in it together.
Yeah.
They are a terrorist military force. When Chomsky says the United States is the greatest terrorist power on earth, he means it literally, pals. This is not metaphoric. It's not to shock you into oh, really? It's not a conversation starter. He means he's a scientist. Okay? He's not into shock statements.
No.
He just says it as he sees it.
Yeah.
And so this question of what is hyper-imperialism, we consider the Western Bloc to be dangerous, extremely dangerous, and decadent. Dangerous because they can destroy countries, and they have shown it.
Yep.
Gaza is a case in point. Decadent because they have no ideas.
Yeah.
They don't know how to develop themselves out of a hole. How is Norway going to create a domestic arms industry? Are you crazy? I know you produce some arms, but you can't produce all arms. You're too small a country to defend. You should be fighting for peace, not fighting against war. I believe in building peace, not building war.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why not? Yeah, so here's Norway, gives the Nobel Peace Prize, yeah, wants to be a big military power. Yeah, good luck with that. I would say to the, what's it called, Storting?
Storting. Yeah.
Storting, good luck with that, friends in the Storting.
Yeah.
Good luck with becoming an independent military power. I wish you luck.
Yeah.
I wish you luck. Bon chance. Well, how do you say wish you luck in Norwegian?
Lykke til.
Lykke til.
Yeah.
Lykke til, Storting kameradis. Lykke til.
Really, yeah.
Lykke til.
It's been really great speaking with you. We have 3 minutes, so I still want to ask you one question.
Okay.
Because one thing that Norway is very, excited about, like they think this is the way to peace, is in January they hosted the Global Alliance for a Two-State Solution, where they invited 86 countries. But somehow Israel was not there. So that's interesting to speak about a two-state solution with clearly one of them not wanting a two-state solution. But we've had a lot of discussions with people as well about a one-state solution, two-state solution. But you've earlier said that Israel's trying to make a three-state solution. What do you mean by that?
No, that's the easiest answer. I don't need 3 minutes for that. That's the three-state solution. That's Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon.
Yeah.
They want to move the Palestinians to those 3 states. That's the solution. Yeah, you can call it the no-state solution. Whatever you want to call it, that's Israeli policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for Israel, the one-state solution is not possible. It's not reconcilable with Zionism. Because you can't have a Zionist state which incorporates Palestinians as full citizens. Because Palestinians are not Jewish. And if you want to maintain an ethno-nationalist Jewish state, then it cannot be a one state. It has to have 2 laws. Yeah. Now, there are only 2 states in the Middle East that are ethno-nationalist states. One is Israel, the other is Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And I find both objectionable on those grounds. I believe in having a multiplicity of peoples in a country and having a minority policy. Yeah. Minority rights, this, that, and the other, and so on. In fact, if you had a one state, you wouldn't need a minority policy because you have pretty evenly distributed populations. Yeah. So I think Israel finds the one state irreconcilable with Zionism because it is. These are not reconcilable.
Yeah.
As Zionism is understood today in the state of Israel, you can have all kinds of messianic Zionisms, all kinds of other Zionism, which can be reconcilable with the one state. You can have diasporic Zionism. There are lots of Zionisms. All Zionism isn't Israeli gun Zionism. Yeah, this particular form of gun Zionism, and the chances are if somebody listens to this will say, oh, he's actually a Zionist because he doesn't condemn all Zionisms. That is an idiotic thing to say. Because there are all kinds of people who are actually practicing Jews, Hasidic Jews, who are against Israel because they are Messianic Zionists. They don't believe in the state of Israel. So it's an uneducated thing to say that, you don't understand what Zionism... Anyway, two-state solution is very interesting in this moment because both China and India support the two-state solution. And I've thought about this greatly and I've talked to people in those political and diplomatic worlds. See, the general argument is until there's a better idea, the two-state solution should not be attacked because the attack on the two-state solution favors Israel. Right now, when China says Israel must honor the two-state solution, China is protecting Gaza, East Jerusalem and West Bank from annexation and actually upholding the ICJ ruling on the apartheid wall. If you say there is no two-state solution, then why is the apartheid wall illegal? Then why are the settlements illegal?
Yeah.
So right now, the two-state solution as a legal matter is not just a trivial thing. It can't just be dismissed, oh, well, it's not, It actually is the basis of all the rulings of illegality of Israeli behavior. So you can't, if I say that, look, the two-state solution is important, you have to understand it in terms of the whole legal architecture that has been built since Oslo. Otherwise, you just dismiss all of these things. You can't say the settlements are illegal. On what basis are the settlements illegal if you reject the two-state solution.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is actually tactically and strategically important as long as you don't have a real solution. So if you don't have a real solution, whatever that might be, this is where you have to be. So I wouldn't knock the government of Norway for having this, even though their motives are probably something else. Because right now, Israel doesn't want a two-state solution. Israel wants the three-state solution. They want to expel all Palestinians. Unless Palestinians are willing to live as second-class citizens in an apartheid state.
Yeah.
So in that context, I would say I defend the two-state solution. Strategically.
Yeah.
But only in that context. And finally, on this point, it's not for me to make any political vision. The question must go back to the 14 factions. This goes back to the prisoner's letter, that came out in 2004, when the leaders of Hamas, Fatah and the left in prison wrote a letter, which is called now the prisoner's letter, where they argue that the Palestinian national imagination has to be recreated. That Palestinians, after Oslo, and particularly after the Second Intifada, have lost the capacity to drive a political narrative. That it's a defensive story. Don't attack us. Don't kill us. Stop coming into our land. Don't violate this green line. Don't do this. Don't do that. But what do Palestinians want? And both the prisoner's letter and the 14-party agreement signed in Beijing recently, a year and a half ago, both of them actually are the foundation stone for renewing a dialogue amongst Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, inside 1948, in the diaspora nearby the refugee camps, and in the diaspora abroad. That is the conversation that has to be held politically. That's not for the three of us to, what's a better solution, guys? Like when you cook a cake, do you like to put the sugar in before or after? This is not a cooking show. We are not cooking Palestine. This is a long drawn out reinvigoration of the Palestinian national imagination. And for this debate, happy to have ideas, but I'm not a participant in it.
Thank you so much,
Thank you very
Vijay.
much.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and your perspective and bringing the vibes.
Danke.
Varsågod.
Tack.